The sheriff's deputies worked through the day, sectioning off the spot where Tom's pig had dug up the running shoe. Crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze, and curious onlookers gathered at a distance, whispering and pointing as investigators moved in and out of the trees. News vans parked along the dirt road, reporters clutching microphones and scanning the forest for any hint of what was happening. Tom stood to the side, leaning against a tree, his hat pulled low over his eyes. Maple, the pig, was at his feet, sniffing around aimlessly now that her work was done. He couldn't stop replaying the moment in his mind, how her hooves scraped at the ground, how he'd seen that shoe half buried in the dirt. The chill that ran through him when he picked it up hadn't left him. He kept asking himself, why here? Why after all this time? Emily's sister Rachel arrived not long after. Someone had called her as soon as the deputies confirmed the find. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hands trembled as she crossed under the tape and spoke quietly with the sheriff. From where Tom stood, he could see Rachel press her fingers to her lips when she spotted the evidence bag containing the shoe. Her shoulders shook slightly, but she stayed composed, nodding as the sheriff explained something to her. That shoe had been identified quickly as the same brand and size Emily had worn on her runs. The other items they uncovered nearby, torn fabric, a plastic water bottle, and what looked like scraps of a jacket, were also consistent with what Emily's family had described her wearing the morning she disappeared, yet none of it made sense. The area where Maple had dug wasn't far from the main trail. It's just a few hundred yards off to the right through a sparse patch of trees. Search teams had combed these woods extensively 2 years ago. How could they have missed this? People around town began talking more openly again. Theories popped up like weeds. Some swore the evidence must have been planted later, that the spot had been empty during the original searches. Others whispered about the possibility of wild animals dragging her belongings away, and some, lowering their voices even further, suggested that maybe Emily had gone into those woods on purpose to meet someone, or to hide from someone. Rachel stayed in town for the following days, walking the trail every morning just as her sister had. Neighbors often saw her standing by the oak tree where the shoe had been found, staring at the disturbed earth as though willing the ground to give up its secrets. She spoke to reporters only once, her voice quiet but steady. "We just want to know what happened to Emily," she said. She loved this place. She loved these woods. She never would have left without telling someone. Somebody knows something. Somebody has to. Meanwhile, the sheriff's office ramped up its investigation. Deputies went door to door again, asking the same questions they'd asked 2 years before. They brought in dogs to scour the area, this time pushing deeper into the forest. They even called in a forensic archaeologist to examine the site more thoroughly. But every answer they uncovered seemed to only lead to more questions. There was no sign of a body. No bones, no definitive evidence of what had happened to Emily. The soil around the oak tree showed signs of having been disturbed at different times, as though someone had dug there more than once. The items they recovered were weathered, but not as deteriorated as one might expect after 2 years exposed to the elements. And strangest of all, there were no footprints or tire tracks near the site, nothing to indicate recent activity. Tom found himself drawn back to the woods even after his part was done. He told himself it was because Maple liked the exercise. But the truth was, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled into something much bigger than he understood. He thought about Emily's face, the one plastered on missing posters that still clung to telephone poles around town, and how she must have felt that morning, jogging through the quiet forest, not knowing what was waiting for her. The locals spoke of her differently now, their words carrying both pity and fear. Some said they remembered seeing a strange car parked near the trailhead the day she vanished. Others claimed to have heard shouting in the woods early that morning, though none of them could agree on the direction it came from. a vineyard worker. Swore he'd seen Emily arguing with a man near the river a week before she disappeared. But his story changed each time he told it. And yet, despite all these accounts, nothing concrete surfaced. The sheriff admitted at a press conference that the investigation remained open and active, but he stopped short of offering any real breakthroughs. "We're following all leads," he said, his expression grim. "We ask anyone with information, no matter how small, to come forward." Late one evening, Rachel sat with Tom on a bench near the trailhead. The woods were quiet, the sun sinking behind the hills. She thanked him softly for what he and Maple had done, though he could hear the weariness in her voice. "I just keep thinking," she said, staring into the trees. "What if she's still out there? What if she's waiting for us to find her?" Tom didn't know what to say to that. He wanted to tell her that he believed Emily was still alive somewhere, that this strange discovery was just the beginning of finding her. But the more he thought about the shoe and the scraps of clothing buried in the dirt, the less sure he felt. And then there was the pig. Maple had started acting odd since that day. Restless, anxious whenever they came near the oak tree again. She would sniff the ground, paw at the earth, then back away, making low, uneasy noises. Tom wondered if she sensed something that humans couldn't. As the nights grew colder and the vines in the valley turned gold and red, the story of Emily Carter began to take on a life of its own again. New reporters arrived, bloggers and podcasters picked up the story, spinning theories about secret lovers, hidden tunnels, even old legends about the forest itself. People began visiting the trail just to stand by the oak tree, snapping pictures, some leaving flowers or notes wedged between its gnarled roots. But through all the noise, one thing remained painfully clear. Nobody knew what really happened. The evidence they had was puzzling and incomplete, hinting at a deeper mystery buried in those woods. Each morning, the fog rolled through the forest just as it had on the day Emily vanished, wrapping the trees in silence. And somewhere beyond that silence, beyond what the eyes could see or the ears could hear, there was still something waiting, some truth yet to be uncovered. Rachel refused to leave Napa until she had answers. Tom continued to wander the woods with Maple, keeping his eyes low to the ground, hoping to stumble on something else, anything that might help piece together the puzzle. And the people of the valley kept talking, kept guessing, their imaginations filling the gaps left by the evidence. But the woods kept their secrets. For now. It was just after sunrise on a crisp autumn morning in the heart of Napa Valley, where the vineyards were shrouded in a gentle fog and the air still smelled of dew on dry earth. The kind of morning that joggers love, cool, quiet, and full of promise. 32-year-old Emily Carter tied her hair back, slipped on her running shoes, and stepped out of her small cottage near the edge of the woods. She waved to her neighbor, who was sipping coffee on the porch, and with a cheerful "see you later," she set off down the familiar trail that wound through the forest and vineyards. But Emily never came back. For weeks, her disappearance baffled everyone who knew her. Friends described her as careful, happy, and deeply in love with the quiet Napa lifestyle she'd built. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence she had planned to leave. Her water bottle and phone were later found tucked neatly on a park bench a mile into her usual route, as though she had just paused for a moment and then vanished into thin air. Search teams combed the area for days. Helicopters hovered overhead. Volunteers walked every inch of the trail, but nothing, not a single clue. The story of the woman who disappeared on her morning jog spread quickly, making headlines, sparking theories, and leaving a haunting question in the minds of everyone who heard it. What happened to Emily? As time passed, the chatter quieted, and the world moved on. The signs with her smiling face faded under the sun. Her case file was tucked away among the many cold cases in the sheriff's office. But her family never stopped hoping. Her parents left the porch light on every night. Her younger sister, Rachel, visited Napa often, still walking the trail where Emily was last seen, calling her name into the silence. 2 years to the day after Emily vanished, another quiet morning in the same woods held a strange twist no one could have imagined. A local man named Tom Hayes, a retired chef who had taken up truffle hunting as a hobby, set out with his trained pig, Maple. Tom was known in town for his love of the woods and his knack for finding rare black truffles in places no one else thought to look. That morning, he headed toward an area just off the jogging trail, hoping to beat the competition to a promising patch of forest. As Tom and Maple weaved between the trees, the pig suddenly stopped and started scratching furiously at the ground, near the base of an old oak. Tom assumed she'd picked up the scent of a truffle, so he crouched down and began to dig alongside her. But what they uncovered was no truffle. At first, Tom thought it was just a torn piece of cloth tangled in the roots. But then he pulled it free and realized it was a weathered running shoe, and inside was something that made his heart stop cold. Word spread fast. Deputies rushed to the scene, tape went up, and reporters gathered at the edge of the woods once again. The quiet trail was swarming with law enforcement, evidence markers dotting the earth, and the people of Napa stood at the sidelines, whispering about what the pig had dug up, and whether this was finally the answer to the mystery that had haunted them for 2 long years. But what Tom and Maple found that morning raised more questions than it answered. The shoe wasn't alone. There were other items in the shallow earth, items no one expected to find in such a place. And what they uncovered hinted at a story much darker and far stranger than anyone had dared to imagine. In the days that followed, investigators began piecing together the strange clues from that quiet corner of the woods. The media reignited its interest. Theories sprouted up again, some logical, some chilling. How did these things get there? Why had they remained hidden for so long, so close to where everyone had searched? And most of all, where was Emily? The forest that had once been a sanctuary for morning joggers, dog walkers, and truffle hunters now felt heavy with unease. Parents held their children's hands tighter on the trail. Neighbors cast suspicious glances at each other, and whispers filled the air. What happened to Emily Carter on that beautiful autumn morning? Why did she leave her phone and water bottle on the bench and walk deeper into the woods? Did she encounter someone? Or something? And why, after all this time, did Maple's sharp snout lead to this strange, unsettling discovery? The answers may lie just beneath the surface of the forest floor, waiting to be unearthed. And as the investigation picks up once again, one thing becomes clear. This story is far from over. Rachel stayed in Napa longer than she planned. Every morning she walked the same path her sister used to run, watching the way the fog lifted from the ground, listening to the birds and the crunch of gravel under her shoes. The oak tree, where Tom's pig had unearthed Emily's belongings, still stood surrounded by yellow tape and markers. Though no deputies lingered anymore, neighbors and hikers still passed by, glancing toward the spot, whispering when they thought no one was listening. Rachel often caught snippets of their conversations, theories, suspicions, even outright accusations, and though she tried to ignore them, they weighed on her. Tom kept to himself after that morning, though Rachel noticed he also returned to the trail nearly every day. He and Maple would walk the edges of the woods, stopping often, as if the pig still caught scents that meant something only to her. Sometimes Tom would catch Rachel's eye and nod, and sometimes he'd just tip his hat and keep moving. It struck her how much quieter the woods seemed now, as though they were holding something back. The sheriff's office brought in new experts. The following week, forensic teams with ground-penetrating radar, more dogs, and even a pair of botanists who studied the soil around the oak tree. One of the botanists mentioned to Rachel that the roots of the oak showed signs of disturbance over the last couple years. as if the ground had been dug up and refilled more than once. That detail lodged itself in her mind, gnawing at her thoughts. One afternoon, Rachel visited the little diner on Main Street, looking for some warmth and maybe a distraction. The owner, Clara, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, brought her a cup of coffee and slid into the booth opposite her. Clara leaned in close and spoke softly. "You know, honey," she began, "not everyone believed Emily's story ended out there. Some folks think she might have gotten herself mixed up with the wrong kind of people. Vineyard workers, strangers passing through. There's a lot of money and a lot of secrets in this valley." Rachel felt her stomach turn, but she listened. Clara went on to mention that the morning Emily disappeared, someone had seen a white pickup truck parked near the back entrance to one of the vineyards that bordered the woods. "Don't know whose truck it was," Clara said. "Didn't recognize it." But it was gone by the time anyone thought to mention it. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. The idea of Emily being taken by someone, driven away while everyone else was drinking their morning coffee or pruning their vines, it was too much to bear. But she also couldn't stop thinking about what the botanist said. Why would the earth under that oak have been disturbed more than once? Meanwhile, another thread quietly began to unravel in the background. A young vineyard worker named Mateo came forward to the sheriff with a strange story. He told them he'd been working in the lower rows of a vineyard that morning 2 years ago when he saw a man in dark clothes moving quickly through the trees. Mateo didn't think much of it at the time. He assumed it was a hiker, but now he was certain the man had been carrying something over his shoulder. He couldn't see clearly, but the memory of it bothered him enough that he decided to speak up. The deputies followed up, but Mateo didn't know the man's face, and no one else recalled seeing anything similar. Still, Rachel clung to his account. She found herself returning to the vineyard where he worked and asking him more questions. He seemed nervous but sincere, describing how the man had glanced back once, meeting his eyes, then disappearing into the trees beyond the vines. The more Rachel learned, the more she realized how many loose threads surrounded her sister's case. There was the white truck no one could trace, the man Mateo saw in the woods, the disturbed ground under the oak tree, and of course, the fact that her sister's belongings were found so close to the trail after countless searches. Each clue raised more questions than answers. Tom, too, was grappling with his own doubts. A few evenings later, he stopped Rachel as she was leaving the trail. "Something's not right," he said quietly, glancing around before speaking. "Maple. She keeps pulling me toward a different spot, about 50 yards from the oak. Same patch of woods, but deeper in. I tried to follow her yesterday, but the ground's hard. I couldn't dig much without making a scene." Rachel felt a chill at his words. If Maple had found something before, could she find something again? But Tom looked uneasy, almost reluctant to press further. "These woods," he added, almost under his breath, "they hold on to things people don't want to see." And then there was the sheriff himself, though he maintained a professional front during press conferences. Rachel began to notice his irritation whenever she or others pressed him for updates. At one point, she overheard him snapping at a deputy. "Outside the office, we're not turning this into another circus. Keep a lid on it until we know for sure." That struck her as strange, as if there was more they'd found but weren't ready to share. Even the people Rachel thought she could trust began to seem more complicated. At one point, she caught Clara whispering to a vineyard owner in the diner late at night, their faces tight with concern. And the vineyard owner, a man named Grant, had been one of the loudest voices calling Emily's disappearance a tragic accident, insisting that she must have wandered off and fallen somewhere nobody thought to look. The woods began to feel different now when Rachel walked them. The trees seemed taller, the shadows darker, the silence thicker. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. though she told herself it was just her imagination. One morning, as she stood by the oak tree, staring at the disturbed soil, she noticed something small glinting just a few feet away. It was, half buried in leaves, a button, dark and scuffed, with a faint engraving she couldn't make out. She picked it up, her pulse quickening. It didn't look like it belonged to anything her sister had worn. Rachel tucked it into her pocket before anyone could see. Maybe it meant nothing, but maybe it was another piece of the puzzle. A puzzle that seemed to grow bigger and stranger with every passing day. The locals continued to talk, to guess, to argue about what happened to Emily Carter. Some swore she'd simply run away. Others claimed she was buried somewhere deeper in the forest. And a few even hinted at darker possibilities, people in town who wanted her gone. But Rachel refused to stop. And though the sheriff, the neighbors, and even Tom all seemed to be holding back pieces of the truth, she was determined to keep pulling at the threads until the whole story came out. The question was, how much more was buried out there in those woods? And how far would someone go to keep it hidden? The days grew shorter, and the air turned sharp with the early chill of winter. Fog clung to the vineyard, rose longer now, and the woods felt even more closed in, almost suffocating at times. Rachel had stopped sleeping through the night. Every sound outside her window jolted her awake. A snapping branch, a car engine idling too long, footsteps she sometimes swore she heard just outside. The button she'd found by the oak stayed in her coat pocket, a quiet reminder that something was still hiding out here, something no one wanted to talk about. Tom became harder to find. He no longer walked the trail openly with Maple, and when Rachel finally caught up to him in town one evening, he seemed jumpy, glancing over his shoulder before speaking. "She keeps pulling me there," he whispered, eyes darting toward the woods. Same place. Every time, and now. His voice trailed off, but Rachel pressed him. He finally admitted that Maple had started pawing at the ground so frantically the day before that she tore her own hoof. "It's like she knows," Tom said. "Like there's something under there she's scared of, but she can't leave it alone." That night, Rachel convinced Tom to take her to the spot Maple had been drawn to. They waited until the sun was nearly gone, sneaking in from a side path so they wouldn't attract attention. The woods were eerily quiet, except for the sound of their own breathing and the crunch of dry leaves underfoot. When they reached the clearing, Maple stopped short, lowered her snout, and began scratching at the ground, whining. Rachel knelt, running her hand over the soil. The ground felt different here, softer in places, damp, despite the dry weather. Tom stood back, arms crossed, muttering that he didn't want to know what was down there. But Rachel couldn't pull herself away, as she dug with her hands, her nails scraping at roots and dirt. Her heart pounded so loud she could hardly hear anything else. It wasn't long before she hit something hard beneath the earth. Her fingers brushed against it, wood, maybe, or stone. She looked up at Tom, who only shook his head and backed away another step. But before she could clear more of the soil, the sound of footsteps startled them both. Not animals' heavy, deliberate footsteps, breaking twigs, coming closer. Rachel froze, her hands still in the dirt. Tom grabbed Maple's leash and tugged her close, eyes scanning the trees. A figure emerged from the darkness just at the edge of the clearing. At first, it was hard to make out, just a tall shadow moving between the trunks. Then the faint beam of a flashlight cut through, catching on the figure's jacket, dark, familiar, and stained with mud. Rachel's breath caught. She recognized the man. It was Grant, the vineyard owner, the same man she'd seen whispering in the diner. The one who always insisted Emily's disappearance was just a tragic accident. He stopped just short of them, his face unreadable, the flashlight hanging loose in his hand. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence felt thick enough to choke on. Then he finally stepped closer, his voice calm but flat. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "This isn't what you think it is." Rachel's pulse roared in her ears. She stood, brushing dirt from her hands, trying to keep her voice steady. "What is it then?" she demanded. "Tell me." Grant didn't answer right away. His eyes dropped to the disturbed ground, then back to her. "You need to leave," he said. "Instead, some things are better left buried." Behind her, Tom shifted uncomfortably, clearly ready to bolt, but Rachel didn't move. "Did you know my sister?" She pressed, taking a step toward him. "Were you out here that morning?" The flashlight beam trembled slightly in his hand, and for the first time, something flickered in his expression. Something Rachel couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe, or anger. Before he could speak again, another noise broke the tension. The snap of another branch, this time from the opposite direction. Rachel spun around just in time to catch another shadow slipping between the trees. Not Grant. Someone else. Her mind raced. How many people were out here? Who else knew about this place? Grant suddenly hissed under his breath and switched off, his flashlight plunging them all into darkness. "Go," he whispered harshly. Now, but it was too late. The second figure was moving closer, deliberate and unhurried, the sound of boots crunching over leaves growing louder. Rachel's throat tightened as she realized that whoever it was didn't seem surprised to find them there, as though they'd been expecting someone to dig. Tom pulled at her sleeve, urging her back toward the trail, but Rachel couldn't bring herself to move. Her eyes adjusted just enough to catch a glint of metal in the second figure's hand. Not a flashlight this time. Something heavier. Grant stepped forward, putting himself slightly between Rachel and the stranger, but his voice shook when he spoke again. "You shouldn't have come here tonight," he muttered, and then the second figure finally spoke, his voice low and unfamiliar. "You've made this harder than it needed to be." Rachel's breath came in shallow gasps. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. She felt the soft earth beneath her shoes, the chill of the air, and the weight of the button still in her pocket. Something about this spot, this very clearing, held the answer to everything, to Emily's disappearance, to Grant's silence, to the strange way the ground had been disturbed again and again. But before she could speak, before she could demand answers, the second figure stepped fully into view, the glint of metal now clearly visible. He raised it slightly, and the woods seemed to close in even tighter, the shadows swallowing the clearing whole. Rachel stood frozen as the air filled with the sound of her own heartbeat, knowing that whatever happened next would finally bring her face to face with the truth she'd been chasing, whether she was ready for it or not. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as the man in the shadows stepped closer, the metal glint in his hand now unmistakable. A shovel, not a weapon, but the way he gripped it sent a chill through her bones. The air between them was heavy with unspoken threat. Grant's face hardened as he planted himself between Rachel and the stranger, but even he seemed unsure whether to speak or to run. Tom stayed frozen just behind her, gripping Maple's leash so tightly his knuckles turned white. Then the stranger finally spoke again, his voice low and rough, almost resigned. "You weren't supposed to find this," he said, his eyes fixed on the patch of disturbed earth. Rachel swallowed hard, her pulse hammering, and forced her voice to come out steady. "Find what?" she demanded. Though her own hands were shaking, the man gave a bitter laugh under his breath and jabbed the shovel into the ground near the spot where she'd been digging. "If you want to see it so badly," he muttered, "might as well show you before someone else does." He thrust the blade down and began prying at the soil. Rachel's stomach churned. Part of her wanted to stop him, but her feet wouldn't move. She watched, feeling the weight of the fog around them as the man dug deeper and deeper, tossing clumps of dirt aside. The sound of the metal cutting through roots and earth echoed in the silence. Then came a dull, hollow thunk. The man stopped digging and wiped his forehead, breathing heavily. Slowly, he reached down and brushed more dirt away with his hands until something dark and wooden came into view. It was a box, not much bigger than a suitcase, old and splintered, with heavy iron hinges. Rachel leaned forward, her whole body tense. She half expected to see Emily's name carved into it, or worse, to see the box open to reveal the unthinkable. But just as the man crouched to lift the lid, another noise cracked through the woods. It's not footsteps this time. Something sharper. A shot. The sound sent birds shrieking from the trees. And all four of them ducked instinctively. Rachel's heart leaped into her throat as she saw a figure darting. Between the trees behind them, a third person, this one carrying a rifle. The man with the shovel cursed and dropped to the ground, while Grant pulled Rachel backward roughly, shielding her behind him. The shooter didn't speak. He simply stopped a few yards away, his face obscured by the hood of his jacket, and raised the rifle again. This time, he aimed at the box itself. A second shot rang out, splintering the wood and sending pieces of it flying. Rachel flinched, but her eyes stayed fixed on the box, now cracked open just enough to show something glinting faintly inside. Metal, not bones. It looked like a stack of small, weathered tins or canisters, the kind she'd once seen in her grandfather's garage. The man with the shovel scrambled to cover the box with his body, shouting something Rachel couldn't make out, but the hooded shooter just stood there, silent, the rifle still raised. Grant finally stepped forward, holding up both hands. "Put it down," he called out, his voice steady but strained. "Nobody here wants trouble. Just stop." But the shooter didn't lower the rifle. Instead, he finally spoke a low, deliberate growl. "You don't know what you're doing. You have no idea what's in there. You don't want to." Rachel's mind reeled. She glanced at Grant, then at the man on the ground. Both of them avoided her gaze, and it hit her then. They did know. Maybe not everything, but enough to make them afraid. And that's when the second twist came. From the darkness behind the shooter, a bright light suddenly flared, another flashlight, held by yet another figure moving quickly into the clearing. This time, it was the sheriff himself. "Drop it." The sheriff barked, his voice cracking through the night air. "All of you, step away from the box." The shooter hesitated, but didn't lower his weapon. The man on the ground froze, his hand still gripping the edge of the box. Grant stiffened, glancing between the sheriff and the shooter like he was calculating which one posed the greater threat. Rachel stayed perfectly still, her mind racing. The sheriff's arrival should have brought her relief, but the way he glared at the box, his jaw tight, his eyes dark, only deepened the pit in her stomach. He didn't look surprised to find them here. If anything, he looked angry. "Sheriff," Rachel began, her voice breaking despite herself. "What's in the box?" For the first time all night, the sheriff glanced at her. And in that split second, she saw it fear. Not for her, not for the others, but for himself. "This ends now," he said flatly, without answering her question, and then everything happened at once. The shooter fired again, the bullet kicking up dirt just inches. From the sheriff's feet, the sheriff lunged forward, his flashlight clattering to the ground. The man with the shovel grabbed the box and tried to drag it away, while Grant shouted something unintelligible. Rachel stumbled back, nearly tripping over a tree root, her heart hammering wildly as chaos erupted around her. Somewhere behind her, Maple barked furiously, pulling at her leash, and Tom yelled her name, but Rachel couldn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the cracked box lying half-buried in the dirt, its contents barely visible, tarnished canisters, what looked like faded documents, and something else, something wrapped in oilcloth, just peeking out from the splintered gnarled screed. Wood. Whatever it was what everyone here had been hiding. The air was thick with shouting. Footsteps pounding, the smell of gunpowder and soil. Rachel dropped to her knees, crawling toward the box as the shooter and the sheriff fought for control of the rifle. Her fingers brushed the edge of the oilcloth. Just as another shot rang out, this one louder, closer, and the clearing was lit up by a blinding flash of light. And then everything went silent. For what felt like forever, the woods stood in eerie silence after the deafening shot. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and damp earth, and faint wisps of fog curled around the shattered box. Rachel stayed frozen on her knees, her fingers still clutching the edge of the oilcloth. Around her, the scene was almost surreal. The sheriff stood stiffly, his gun arm lowered now, his eyes fixed on the ground. The shooter lay a few feet away, groaning, the rifle kicked from his reach. The man with the shovel had backed away completely, his hands in the air, and Grant just stared at Rachel like he finally understood something terrible and too late. Her hands trembled as she pulled the oilcloth free. Whatever lay beneath it felt heavy, dense, not at all what she had expected. She unraveled it carefully, and there, in the dim light of the sheriff's fallen flashlight, she saw what they had all been fighting over. It wasn't a body, it wasn't jewelry or gold, or even anything that looked valuable at first glance. Instead, the bundle revealed a stack of metal tins and a few yellowed papers bound with twine. And then, at the very bottom, wrapped more tightly, was a strange, sealed envelope marked in thick, smudged ink. Confidential property of United States Army. Rachel's breath caught. She turned the papers over in her hands, scanning them. Most of it was faded, technical looking, but she caught words that sent a chill through her. Test site, biohazard, classified, Napa Valley. What is this? She asked aloud, her voice cracking. That's when the sheriff finally spoke, his voice low and almost defeated. It's what she found, he said. His eyes met hers now, and there was no more anger in them, only weariness. Your sister, Emily. She came here jogging that morning, same as always, but she saw what she wasn't supposed to. She saw us digging this up. Rachel felt the ground tilt under her. She shook her head, gripping the envelope tighter. No, she whispered. You're saying you? Grant stepped forward then, his face pale, his voice shaking. Not me. Not him either. Not really, he said, motioning toward the sheriff. It was already here. This box, whatever was buried in it, it's been here longer than any of us. Decades, maybe more. The sheriff nodded faintly. Your sister. She tried to tell someone. She ran. I tried to stop her. He closed his eyes as though it hurt him to speak. She tripped. Hit her head. By the time we realized she wasn't breathing, it was too late. We panicked, we thought. Burying the box deeper and leaving no trace would keep it all quiet. Rachel's chest heaved as the weight of his words sank in. The story she'd been chasing of a woman vanishing on a morning jog was never about a random disappearance. It was about a secret buried in the woods, something dark enough that men would kill to protect it. But then, just as she was about to stand, another voice cut through the quiet. A woman's voice. Put it down, it commanded sharply. Rachel spun around, her eyes landing on a new figure stepping out from the shadows. She wore a dark jacket, her hair tied back, and she carried herself with calm authority. In her hand was an ID badge that glinted in the faint light. Department of Defense. You've seen enough, the woman said firmly. This doesn't belong to you. Hand it over. Rachel clutched the envelope to her chest, her mind racing. You knew, she demanded. You knew she was here. You knew about Emily? The woman's expression softened just enough to show a trace of regret. We've "Been watching this site for a long time," she admitted. "Your sister wasn't supposed to see. But that doesn't change the fact that what's in that box is not for you to keep. It's not even safe for you to hold." Before Rachel could argue, the sheriff moved between them. "We've done enough," he said quietly, looking at the woman. "Let her leave. Let her take it if she wants. She deserves the truth after all this." The woman hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly, but then she let out a sharp breath. "Fine," she said, lowering her hand. "But know this, if you open what's in that envelope, you'll wish you hadn't." With that, she turned on her heel and vanished back into the trees, the sound of her boots fading into the fog. Rachel stayed crouched by the box, the woods once again silent around her. Tom finally stepped forward, placing a tentative hand on her shoulder. Grant and the sheriff stood a few feet away, their heads bowed, saying nothing. Rachel slowly rose, the envelope still clutched tightly in her hands. The box remained behind, shattered and empty now, its secrets spilling out in the dirt. But just as she turned to leave, something in the dirt caught her eye, a glint of metal half buried near where the box had been. She crouched one last time and dug it free. It was a small tag, tarnished and bent, but still legible. Her heart skipped when she read the engraving. Emily Carver Project. Witness. Her sister's name. Rachel's eyes widened as she stared at the tag. It wasn't just that Emily had stumbled into something she shouldn't have. She had been part of it. All along, the wind picked up through the trees, carrying the faint sound of sirens in the distance. Rachel stood there in the clearing, gripping the envelope in one hand and the tag in the other. Feeling the ground beneath her shift once again, she thought she'd come here to find out what happened to her sister. But now, she realized she'd only uncovered the beginning of something much larger and far more dangerous than she could have imagined. For 2 years, the mystery of Emily's disappearance haunted Napa, a small town wrapped in beauty, but now shadowed by unanswered questions. When the truffle hunter's pig uncovered that unexpected clue deep in the forest, it was like waking a sleeping giant. The discovery didn't just reopen the case, it stirred the whole community, reminding everyone of the fragile line between everyday life and the unknown. What the pig found was a small, weathered backpack, half buried under layers of leaves and dirt. Inside were personal items, a water bottle, a worn-out running shoe, and a phone that surprisingly still had a bit of battery left. The police quickly collected the evidence, and the investigation gained new momentum. For the first time in years, hope flickered that Emily's fate could finally be revealed. Forensic experts worked through the night, pulling data from the phone and examining every detail. The phone's last location pinged near the trails where Emily was last seen. More than that, there were photos, blurred, shaky images that showed signs of distress. In one of the photos, a shadowy figure appeared briefly, but it was too unclear to identify. Still, it was a breakthrough, a sign that Emily had been somewhere close to where the backpack was found. Neighbors and friends came forward, sharing memories and insights that helped paint a fuller picture. Emily had often mentioned feeling uneasy during her runs, saying she sometimes thought she was being followed. Nobody had taken those worries seriously then, but now, those words gained new weight. The police intensified their search in the area around where the backpack was found. Local volunteers, hikers, and even the truffle hunter himself joined in. It was during one of these searches that they found something else, a small hidden path leading to a secluded part of the forest. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, but it matched the terrain shown in the photos from Emily's phone. Following the path, the searchers discovered a makeshift shelter made of branches and tarps, hidden deep enough to be out of sight, but close enough to the trail. Inside were remnants of someone's stay, a tattered blanket, some canned food, and notes scribbled on pieces of paper. The notes were from Emily, describing her fears and attempts to find a way out. It was clear she had been trapped or hiding here for some time. Further investigation suggested Emily might have been abducted by someone living off the grid in the woods. A person who was deeply troubled, avoiding the world, and whose presence had gone unnoticed by the community. Authorities traced footprints and other evidence back to a suspect who was later apprehended. Someone with a history of similar crimes in other areas, but who had remained hidden in Napa's remote parts. Emily was found alive, but weak, suffering from dehydration and exposure. She had been held captive, but managed to leave clues for rescuers to find her. Her survival was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to her strength and willpower in the face of terrifying circumstances. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief. Emily's safe return ended the nightmare that had gripped Napa for so long. Her story became a reminder of the importance of community, vigilance, and never giving up hope, even when the odds seem impossible. In the weeks that followed, Emily shared her story publicly, not to dwell on the trauma, but to help others understand the importance of speaking up about their fears and trusting their instincts. Her courage inspired many, and the community rallied around her, offering support and love. The Truffle hunter's pig, unintentionally, became a local hero, the small spark that reignited the search and brought light to a dark mystery. Emily's experience also led to changes in local safety measures. More signs were put up around the trails, community watch groups were formed, and efforts to keep the forests safe increased. The incident taught everyone that even in peaceful places, awareness matters. Looking back, it's the story of the woman who vanished on her morning jog and the unexpected role of a truffle hunter's pig is about more than just a mystery solved. It's about resilience, community, and the small, unexpected moments that can change everything. It's a reminder that sometimes the answers we seek are hidden in the most unlikely places. And that hope can be found even in the darkest times. Emily's journey wasn't easy, but it showed how strength and support can guide someone back from the brink. As Napa returned to its quiet beauty, the story left behind a powerful lesson. Never underestimate the human spirit. And never stop searching for the truth, because sometimes it's the smallest discovery that can bring the biggest hope. And so, the morning trails of Napa carry on, now touched by the memory of a woman who vanished but refused to be forgotten, and a pig whose keen nose changed the course of a mystery forever.